So on video 3, I got cut off explaining right in the middle of this question, so we're going to start over on number 4. In order to add or subtract fractions, you need a common denominator. So, the lowest common denominator is best. So in this case, we have these steps provided for us to be able to find the LCD. Step 1 is to completely factor all denominators. Okay, so let's do that. Let's move this to the side. And that first denominator, you can't really factor it. I mean, you could break it down if you wanted to 3 times x times x. Might as well do that just for fun. 3 times x times x. And the other one, we could factor out a 3x. And what would we have left if we factor out a 3x? We would have a 3x minus 4. So step 1, to completely factor the denominators, is done. So step 2 says circle what's in common in both and write it down once. So I see a 3x right here and I see a 3x right here. You know what? Let me circle them in blue here. The 3x, I want to circle this 3x and I want to write it down once. So let me make a little more space here. So I want to write down that 3x one time, okay? That's what it says. Circle what's in common in both and write it down once. That's what I did. Circled what was in common in both and wrote it down once. It says then bring down the rest. What do I mean by bring down the rest? Well, we need to bring down this x that's left over. So let me write it down right there. And let me bring down this binomial that's left over. So let me bring it down right here. 3x minus 4. So it says multiply it all and it gives you the LCD. Now we don't even have to really multiply it all. If I wanted to, I could say this is 3x squared. But multiplying it all, making a 3x squared and then distributing, actually is not a good idea in this case because we want to leave it in factored form just in case we could cancel at the very end. But my point here is that this is the LCD. This is your lowest common denominator right here. That's how you find it. Okay, once again, we factored the denominators. So here they are factored. And then we took what was in common in both and wrote it once. And then we took what was left over and brought it down and wrote it also. And that's your LCD. So each of these fractions, we need to rewrite them with the LCD, which is 3x times 3x minus 4. So there it is. I've written the two fractions with that LCD. And now the question is, let's go back to the original fractions. I have a 3xx right here, and down here I have a 3xx times 3x minus 4. So obviously the 3x minus 4 is the missing part. So I need to multiply both top and bottom by 3x minus 4. So I want to put the 3x minus 4 right there, but that really doesn't even matter. What matters is when I put it up on top, 3x minus 4, I need to actually multiply 3x minus 4 times 1. Now in this case it doesn't change, it's still going to be 3x minus 4. Now if it were a 2 up here instead of a 1, you'd have to distribute the 2, but distributing a 1 doesn't change anything, it still stays 3x minus 4. Now let's move to the other fraction over here, and this is our new LCD. So how are we going to change this old factored denominator to become this new LCD? Well, the question is what is missing? So I have a 3x up here, I have a 3x down here. I have a 3x minus 4, I have a 3x, whoa, that's supposed to be a 3x minus 4, I'm sorry. There we go, I'm glad we caught that. So I have the 3x minus 4 up here, we have a 3x minus 4 down here. What's missing from this original denominator to this new LCD? What's missing? One single x, right? So we have this x right here that's missing, so I want to put another x down there, and what I do to the bottom I do to the top. So I'm going to have to multiply x times x, and I will get x squared up here on top. You guys get it? So now that I have a LCD, a common denominator, now I'll be able to add or subtract the top with the top, okay? Now our answer is still going to be over that LCD. And just to make it look a little nicer, since I know that this is going to be my final answer, I actually multiplied the x times x and wrote it as x squared. Okay, so there's my LCD. And what's left over up on top? Well, whenever you have a minus sign, if you had a binomial over here with a bunch of, or a trinomial, you'd have to distribute it to each and every term. But since it's just x squared, you still distribute it, but it's a negative x squared. And that's going to be your leading term, negative x squared. And then you're going to bring down the rest. What is the rest? There's a positive 3x, and there's a minus 4 at the very end. So ladies and gentlemen, this is your final answer. Now, or maybe not. I'm sorry, maybe not. Now the reason why I say maybe not is because this is a quadratic trinomial, and there's a negative in front, so maybe it'd be a good idea to factor out a negative 1. Let's see what happens. Let me factor out a negative 1, and what would be left on the inside? An x squared minus 3x with a plus 4. Yeah, it's not going to work. I was checking to see if maybe this quadratic trinomial could be factored, and maybe you end up with something that could cancel with something down here, but that didn't work, so yeah. This is the final answer. What do you guys think? So let's check out the worksheet. The worksheet I handed out, let's move on to that. This is worksheet 8.2. And the first part of this worksheet is just practicing finding the lowest common multiple, or I guess you could call it the least common denominator when it comes to fractions. But right here, since we don't have fractions, we're just going to practice and pretend like if these guys were denominators and go through the steps of factoring them, circling what's in common, writing it once, and then bringing down everything else. Okay, that is step 2 from finding the LCD. Okay, again, circle what's in common in both, write it down once, and then bring down the rest. Bring down everything else. So let's first factor it, and let's write down x. Instead of x squared, let's write it down as x times y. Okay, there's our first term. Our second term, we're going to rewrite it as x times y times y times y instead of y to the third. Okay, so again, you factor it. It's already factored. Now we're going to circle what's in common. Okay, we're going to circle what's in common. So I have 1x right here, and I have 1x right there. Okay, so let me write it down once. I circle what's in common and then I write it down once. So I have a single x right there. What else is in common? We have the y's, obviously. So how many y's do we have in common in both groups? We have one y in common in both groups. So let me circle this in black. We have one y right here and one y over here. So I'm going to bring that down as one single y. Okay, so that was what was in common. Again, this x and this x came down as one single x. I wrote it down once. This y and this y, I wrote it down as one single y. And then what about the rest? I bring it down. So this, let me change colors here. This x and this y, I'm going to bring them down. So I'm going to bring down the x, the y, and the y. So ladies and gentlemen, my LCD will be this. Let's just multiply it through because it's a monomial. I'm going to multiply it through. So I'm going to have x squared y to the third. So that would be your answer for number 1. So x squared y to the third is the answer, your least common denominator if it were fractions, if they were denominators to start with. The only reason why they call them least common multiples right here is because these were not fractions to start with. It's like regular terms. So, but this is practice to find that least common denominator. All right. So all we're doing in this first section is practicing. Okay, we're practicing step 2. After you factor your denominator, you practice writing down what's in common once and then bringing down everything else. And when it's a monomial like these guys, you actually have to multiply it through to state your LCD. So once again, let's factor both of these. A squared is going to be a times a. B cubed is going to be b times b times b. And the c obviously is just c. That's the first term. Now the second term is going to be a B, and then C, 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 C. 4 C's. Okay, so what we do is circle what's in common in both and write it down once. Keyword once, right? So in the first one, both of them I have A's. Question is how many A's? Well, I have one A right here, I'm circling it, another A over here, and that's the maximum amount of A's I have. So I need to write down that first A one time. That's it. Okay? And now, what else is in common? Well, we have also B values and C values. So let's go with the B's first. We have one B right here, and we have one B over here. So we're going to write down that one B just once. Okay? And we also have C's in both. Okay? So let's go with the C up here. I'm circling it. I'm circling one of these C's, and I want to write it down one time as one C. Okay, and then after you identified everything that was in common in both, these A's came down as one A. These B's, you wrote it once. These C's, you wrote it once. What do you do with the rest? So after you write down what's in common in both, what do you do with the rest? You bring it down. So what's left over? We have this A, we have two B's, and we have three C's. So let me just bring that down. One A, two B's, three C's. That's what was left over. So now let's just multiply it all through. Because it's a monomial, we're going to multiply it all through. So your final LCD, if it were denominators, but in this case LCM, is A squared, because you have A times A, and you have B to the third, because there's one B, two, three B's right there, so that's B to the third. And finally, the C's, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 C's, so C to the fourth. So ladies and gentlemen, that's your LCM, or your LCD if these were denominators, for number 2. Now most of the time we're not even going to have monomials. We might have binomials like this, right? So could we factor this first one? Yes or no? Could we factor this first one? Is there x's in both? Is there a common multiple in both that I could GCF that I could pull out? Okay, so there is nothing, right? Okay. Now, how about this one? No, so you can't factor. So now, these are already factored. They're already simplified. So, what would my LCD be, or my LCM be? Well, you have to write down what's in common in both. Now, because these are binomials, it's like if you treat it as a single term. You can't say, oh, there's an x in both, because these are binomials. So, in the first term, you're going to treat this like if it were x plus 1, it's just x plus 1. And you bring down the other one, which is x plus 3. And of course, your LCD or your LCM will be multiplying them both together. So that is your answer, both of those together with multiplication. There was nothing in common that we could circle and write down once. Does that make sense? Moving on. So let's look at our first term, the g minus 1. Let's call that a binomial, as if it were one item. And the g squared plus 3g minus 4, that could be factored. Okay, so let's factor that one first. G, what times what is negative 4 that if you combine together is positive 3? Positive 4, negative 1, excellent. Okay, so now let's look at our first term and our second term, and let's circle what's in common and write it once. So what's in common in the first group and the second group? The binomial g minus 1. This whole binomial g minus 1 is over here, g minus 1. So you circle what's in common and you write it once. Okay, so what am I going to write? I'm going to write g minus 1. There, I wrote it once. And then what do you do with the rest? You bring it down. So I'm just going to bring down the g plus 4. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the LCD, g minus 1 times g plus 4. So we're going to pick it up here on the next video.